Hi, I'm Judy from Fox Cities Quilt Company, and this is Sunday from the Sewing Room, where we give you some tips, some tricks, and a few tutorials to help you with your sewing and quilting projects. And if you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button below. So today I want to talk to you about quilting cottons aren't always for quilting. I want to talk to you about garment sewing. A lot of people are afraid of garment sewing, and you shouldn't be. I find it to be a little more forgiving than quilting, because if you get off a little bit on one seam, it doesn't affect everything. If you get off a little bit in quilting and you keep being off a little bit, then it's a huge difference throughout your quilt. But with garment sewing, not so much. You want it to be right, but it is a little bit more forgiving. So today I'm going to talk to you about making something that you don't even need a pattern for. You just need a few measurements of your waist, and it's really so simple. So I am making this adorable skirt. It's a super simple skirt. When I saw this fabric come into the shop, I just loved it so much. A lot of times we take border stripes and we cut them up and we'll make table runners. But when I saw this, I just thought that this was just, I just thought that this was just adorable. So let me show you how I do this, and I'm going to get you started. For this project, I am using fabric that is a border stripe. It's really, really pretty. It has less movement towards the top of the fabric and more movement towards the bottom of the fabric. And it also has this cute little border. This is called Flutterby, and it is by Dashwood Studios, and I will show you the name of it. And how I get my measurement for this one is I measured 1.5 times the size of my waist, and that is the length of fabric that I'm going to use. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it is 1.5 times is because I'm going to use both sides of this. I'm going to cut it right along this top edge, and I am going to use both sides of this. If you're using one fabric, you want to go 2.5 times the length of, or the width or the circumference of your waist. And that's so that you have a little bit of gathering. And then for the bottom, because I wanted it to be a little bit longer, because I'm going to take up some room at the top for my elastic, I decided to make it a little longer by I'm going to add this little coordinating print. This up too is called Flutterby by Dashwood Studios, and this is going to be the bottom of my skirt. I thought it would end up really, really cute. And then I am also using 1 inch of elastic. And I have this thicker no roll elastic. This is going to be so simple. And I'm going to use a coordinating thread. I didn't have this nice charcoal gray, so I'm just going to use black. I didn't want to go out and buy a brand new spool of thread for just one project. And so I'm going to show you what I'm doing, and I will get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to cut my fabric in two, so that I'm going to have about 22.5 inches from the top of the fabric to the selvage. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that off, just putting it on the fold. If it's a tiny bit off, I'm not going to worry about it, because this skirt is so forgiving. If it's off by 1/8 of an inch, because it gathers, nobody's going to be able to know. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that off just like that. And boy, my blade is pretty dull. So that I have now 2 pieces of fabric. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these 2 pieces of fabric together, right sides together, so that I have one big long piece of fabric, and I am going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance on that. If you have a serger, go ahead and use your serger. But I wanted to show, a lot of people don't have sergers, so I wanted to make sure that I show you the sewing technique. But the one thing I am going to do is when I sew this, I am going to make sure that those stripes line up really nicely when I sew this. All right, so I have sewn that seam together and with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And remember I said I wanted those stripes to line up nicely, and they really did. And then you can see it on the back side, there's my 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now I want to take the opportunity while this is still flat to add the bottom that I wanted to add. And I'm going to leave this selvage on there because I'm going to help it use it as a part of my seam allowance and as my guide. And I am going to add this on. Now I want to have a 3-inch border at the bottom. I'm not going to ruffle it. I'm not going to cut it extra length, but I do have to put some pieces together. But I want it to look super easy and super finished. So I'm going to cut these 3.5 inches wide, or no, excuse me, I need a blooper reel for crying out loud. 6.5 inches wide to accommodate for my seam allowance, and I'm going to add those to the bottom of my skirt, because this is the bottom of my skirt, so that I have that edge. And I will have to piece this together, but it's busy enough and it's going to be at the bottom of the skirt, so I don't think anybody is going to see that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut my 6.5 inch by width of fabric strips. I'm going to sew them together on my short 6.5 inch edge, and I'm going to lay them at the bottom. And after I get these cut, I'll come back and I'll show you what I've done. Okay, so I've sewed my two pieces of fabric together on the short end, and then I have folded this wrong sides together so that I have a nice even fold. And so it will look like I will have that band on the bottom on both sides, so it'll look nice and finished underneath too. So I'm pretty lucky because if I line this up with the seam that I have here, I am going to be able to line up that seam with my side seam, and I'm going to pin this all the way down so that it lines up. And this is where I'm going to use that selvage as part of my seam allowance, or to help me guide. So I'm going to line this up right with the selvage all the way down. I'm going to pin it, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this. And then what I will do is I will flip it over so that it's right side out, and then I will probably put a nice finishing stitch over the top of this, if I can find the right color thread. But let me do that 1/4 inch seam allowance and get this sewn onto the bottom, and I will come right back to you. But keep in mind that if you're not using a border stripe, or if you want your skirt shorter, you don't have to add this. I just wanted it because I wanted a little bit of length, because I like to cover up my knees. And I'm just more comfortable that way. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm adding this 3 inches just for length. This is not something that you have to do, but it's something that I'm choosing to do because I am using a border stripe. So let me get this sewn on and I'll come right back to you and show you what that looks like. All right, so I have sewn that 6.5 inch piece, ironed and folded wrong sides together onto the bottom of my skirt, and I wanted to show you that. And I have pressed it down, and I have pressed it towards that selvage. And you see, I have used this selvage as kind of my stabilizer for this. I'm going to have to press that down a little bit because I do want to come over the top, and I am going to put a top stitch here. It'll make it look more finished. and I'm probably going to do it in this blue color. It'll make it look more finished, and it will help this extra fabric that I added for length to stay down. Then the next thing I will do after that is I am going to fold this wrong sides together, or excuse me, right sides together, lining up that bottom edge. And with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I am now going to complete the circle of my skirt. And I will show you what that looks like when I come back. Okay, just a couple more steps and your skirt is almost done. I've added my extra length onto the bottom. I was careful to line up the edges. I put in a top stitch so that it looks nice and finished. And now I have both side seams put together, and I was careful, I got a little off here, to line up not just the extra fabric that I put on the bottom, but also the stripes. They're off here. Let's see how I did over on this side. But they are really good there, okay? So now what I'm going to do is we need to make a pocket or a tube for our elastic. And my elastic, again, is 1 inch wide. So in order to make that pocket, I'm going to turn down my fabric about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm using my seam gauge. If you don't have a seam gauge, just go ahead and use a quilting ruler, because there's always a 1/4 inch mark on there, and there it is. And I am going to press that down all the way around the skirt at 1/4 inch. Now again, my elastic is 1 inch, so I'm going to turn this down again in order to make room for my elastic, and I'm going to turn that down 1.5 inches, which is right there. And I'm going to make sure that that's 1.5 inches down all the way, because then I'm going to go and I'm going to do an edge stitch here as well as an edge stitch up here. That's why I want the extra 1/2 inch, so that my 1 inch elastic will go inside. And the reason that I am doing a stitch on each side is because if I do that, my elastic is least likely to roll on me, which makes the skirt really, really uncomfortable. So I'm going to go do that. I'm going to press this down, and then I'm going to put my 2 edge stitches in like I had said, and I'm going to show you then how to put in your elastic. So I will be right back and show you how to do that. I've completed sewing all the way around to make my tube for my elastic. And as you can see, I edge stitched close to this edge here. Let me get that close to you. And edge stitched around the top so it looks nice and finished. I started at one side seam. This skirt is just a circle, so there's really no front or back to it unless you want to put a label in it. That's fine. But I've sewn all the way around. When I got to this seam, however, I stitched all the way around on the top, but I left this part open on the bottom because that's where I'm going to feed my elastic into. So I have my elastic cut, and I want you to measure your elastic around your waist, make it a little snug, and then add 2 inches, because when we're done feeding the elastic through, we're going to take a couple inches on each side and we're going to stitch all the way around this so our elastic doesn't come apart and it stays nice. Now, to fish your elastic through, I'm taking a big safety pin, and I'm going to put it into the edge of my elastic on one side, just like that. And I'm going to close it, okay? So you can see what that looks like. And then I'm going to make sure this is nice and straight, and I'm going to take another safety pin, and I'm going to put it through my elastic. But this side, I want you to see, I'm going to pin it to my selvage or to my seam allowance so that this doesn't get away from me. So in other words, so I don't fish this all the way through and I got to go chasing that. So I'm going to put this together, and then I'm going to come all the way back to the first safety pin that I put in, and I'm going to fish that right up in there. And I'm just going to keep pushing this all the way around my skirt until I get it all the way around. And because remember, I told you that you should do 1.5 or 2 times the size of your waist. It's going to be nice and ruffly. And it'll gather really nicely and it'll just drape really nicely. So let me finish fishing this through and I will show you what this looks like when I come back. So I fished this all the way through and you can see this is going to ruffle up nicely and have a nice little drape to it. And I'm going to now take this over to my sewing machine and I am going to go over these 2 edges and I'm going to do several stitches in here so that I make sure that this elastic does not come apart. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with my sewing machine and fold this back under and finish sewing this close, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. So here's my skirt. It's all finished. I got my elastic in there and I closed up that seam and went over it a couple times after I put my elastic together to close the waistband. This is so fun, so cute, and I can't wait to wear it. And as I'm making it, I think, gosh, I could make this so simply with so many things for so many seasons. So even if you found like a really cute plaid flannel, for instance, you could make this and wear it with some leggings and some cute boots and a turtleneck, and you'd have a really cute winter skirt as well. This is Judy from Fox Cities Quilt Company. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.